Hello everyone, welcome back. Earlier on, we continued our investigations into the concept of mimetics, the work of Richard Dawkins, and explored some of the work that we're going to do in the future around mesmerism, Franz Mesmer, and also put on pause for now some of the stuff that we found out a couple days back relating to Death Stranding, the Earth Grid Network, and the DC Parasite Network, and how it's hacking into those said memes. From that video I did earlier on, this is a brief supplement, and it's going to be relating to Earth's solar forcing that it experiences through its interaction of magnetosphere to the coupling that it does with our own sun. And we're going to tie that back directly as a transition to one of the articles we referenced in our last video around the Storm Area 51 meme, how it was hijacked, of course, and how they wanted to get this rather tuned in, the attention-wise of the popular media, onto this Greta Thunberg character who, as we recall, we talked about hijacked our emotion with appeal to emotion and inflicted personal incredulity in us with this article, or at least attempted to. And as we're going to go into with the solar forcing, to continue to do with climate change is inflict yet another logical fallacy, the false cause. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, because not only does solar forcing factor into the expansion joints that we've so eloquently, I hope, discussed with Samuel Warren Carey's work, as it matches up to, of course, the Earth Grid Network of the Florida Maquis that we've been mentioning in the Area 51 from earlier. It has implications in that, but it also has implications in just how much humans themselves cause these climate forcing issues to occur. And I think that's what, by going into Ben Davidson's work, whose work this book is for, The Weatherman's Guide to the Sun, we're going to be able to find out for ourselves. And again, give ourselves another tool as to how to prevent ourselves from being caught into a bad meme. So anyway, to start off, I also want to talk about, first and foremost, the article that we discussed last time already, just briefly, and show you guys where everything's going wrong with this current debate with the climate change, right? Like I said, everybody's feeling things. The climate's certainly changing, and I would never be somebody to argue that, but it's really important for us to think critically about what exactly is causing these changes so we can respond appropriately to them. And in this case, the false meme that's being generated is that of the CO2 and the human contribution to the pollution that's causing all of this stuff. And while human pollution is a huge problem, I'm one to believe in the whole Captain Planet way of existence, right? And how'd the song go in that show? I think bring pollution down to zero, right? That's not something that is causing, by and large, the climate forcing issues that we're experiencing. And so that's what they're really trying to get you away from. And because, as Ben Davidson shows in his book, and as he shows here, in fact, just in this graphic, this is a video I'm going to link that I recommend everybody reference. I'm going to prove, I hope, with a little bit more hope than he does, that he leaves the viewer with in his video, kind of expand on the concept of our future is cold a bit. But I do recommend anybody go looking to learn about the magnetism and electric universe model of our sun, and start to go away from the main paradigm of the nuclear model. They go pick up his work, because along with Anthony Perot, it's just some of the best stuff out there. And he goes into those cosmic rays. He goes into basically everything that you'd want to know about the corona, the solar wind, the particle effects of what the sun is hitting us with. But I also haven't come to his work quite yet, because I needed to build the foundation before we got here, because without going through Walter Cruttenden and Samuel Warren Carey and Keshava Bhaat's work in my previous videos, we can't complete a picture as to what's happening. Ben, therefore, in other words, does not prescribe to the binary star model like we do, where Sirius orbits our sun and creates the Yuga cycle that you see here, and therefore Daniel's timeline. By the way, bad meme Daniel's timeline. does not line up, just like the Western astrology calendar does not line up with the actual Yuga cycle. These dates do not align with the actual Yuga cycle dates, as we've discussed with the hiding of the Sphinx, going back to another concept over here, with the carving back of the lion. The Sphinx originally was a lion, and approximately 40% of its mass was carved back to hide something as it relates to these specific cycles, just as a reminder, right? There's something of a meme being hidden here and misdirecting us away from what I believe is the Atlantis event, of course, only going back a certain amount of time, so we have amnesia about the whole thing. But he does not get any of that perspective. Therefore, even though he's a master student of cycles, he doesn't get a lot of where we've come to believe these things of our ancient past have come to mean either. But Kashababat is not somebody else that he subscribes to the work of either, and so therefore he doesn't have the same representation that we do of the helical model of our solar system. He prescribes to the Copernican heliocentric model. So he can be forgiven of all these things because they actually don't affect any of our research otherwise, at least in terms of solar forcing. It in of itself is an enclosed system where we can speak of it without any of these things being the case. But it's just a full disclosure in terms of me recommending his work to anybody. I also recommend the work of everybody else I've covered, because only then can we get the whole picture. But he kind of goes in with this video and he breaks apart all of the different particles that are getting around our sun and of course interacting with our Earth. This thing will load up here. Just a second here. There we go. So when those particles hit the Earth, they create something of an effect that you see here. And if you can imagine that these arrows are actually vortexes going through the material of the Earth, you're going to start to see there's a lot of dynamic electromagnetic process going on here. And the forcing effect, as he says, these cells along would determine where the tropical versus polar air reaches, right here in these blue areas. This is where the forcing occurs that causes a lot of what we're seeing right now. And long story short, if you'll allow me to come over here and show you exactly what's happening with the polar vorticity, it's because we've got a weakened connection to our magnetosphere. We've got all that particle forcing happening past our sun. Our sun's corona is shrinking. It's dropping to degrees, a temperature of 3,000 degrees Kelvin from 5,000 degrees Kelvin. And therefore we've got a weakened magnetosphere and we're getting blasted with more UVC. And in the wintertime, we're getting a lot more polar vortex creep, I will call it, coming down into the United States. And normally these jet streams are supposed to be nice and tight along the top here, and in times of solar minimum, this is when they get loose like slack on a rubber band coming down, and now we get absolute cold weather forcing from space essentially and causing havoc on our crops. So in my opinion, I suspect this is why they're actually keeping a lot of this knowledge from us. It's not because they want to tax us with CO2 with that meme, but they also want to keep us from figuring out that our food is about to get ravaged. So all of this is real important information for us to keep in mind, because this is actually both of these slides, in fact, are from a presentation I'll link from a guy named Charles Scott, who puts this wonderful presentation up online for free. I'm going to link where you can get that, but he goes into a lot of the effects that the breadbasket had just this last March. And Ben Davidson forecasts actually probably another 11-year cycle before things get really, really bad. But we're getting down to the point where we're in a solar minimum now. Like I said, another sunspot cycle is going to occur, which is every 11 years. So another 11 years from now, in other words, 2030-ish, things will start to get to the point where we reach, ice age type conditions in certain parts of the world that haven't experienced that in a while. As we lead up to that, it'd be wise for us to arm ourselves with this stuff so you can basically stay alive. This is kind of a representation of that magnetic flux going out of phase, forecast into the past by about 30-40 years, and then forecasting out to 2040 as well. And if you can kind of tell here, the phasing of the electromagnetic patterns kind of follow each other all the way up until here, this demarcation point. And all of a sudden, now we get not the same curvature, but a reverse inverse of each other, of these curvatures. And this is the Sun and the Earth's magnetic coupling to each other. And it's going to take some time for it to recover. On a grand scale, this happens every once in a while. We have a propensity for magnetic pole reversal when this happens, in fact, which Ben goes into the distinct possibilities of. But we have to kind of wait for it to correct for itself. And in the meantime, we get these really extreme highs and really extreme lows. It essentially means, in my understanding, that we'll have really harsh summers and really cold winters without much variability in between. Spring and fall end up being, relics of the past in certain parts of the world. So anyway, with this solar forcing, of course, the particulates are also going to, she's got a really great model some point here in the video. I'm going to get to it. There it is. Here's a wider view of kind of a more complete system. Please watch this whole video, guys. I would love for you to learn a little bit about what these dynamics mean for yourselves as you prepare for events to come, given what I just said. But when we're considering the entire model, of course, we're considering the consciousness factor of resisting memes, and we're considering the temple structures that exist along the ley lines for them to be hijacked by those that know how to hijack them. We kind of see why there's a war, both for memes and spots on the Earth at this point in time, and areas like Area 51 and the Pentagon are origination nodes, let's call it, for hacking in. And all of those points are going to be capturing, of course, energy that's coming in from the Sun. And as the Earth expands, like we've talked about before, sorry, I've got thunder and lightning going over the top of me now. I don't know if any of you guys can hear that, but I apologize if that ends up being distracting. But going back to Neil Adams' work, of course, and back into the book of Constant and Mile in the Earth expansion theory, and of course Samuel Warren Carey's observations from the 1950s, we get the picture of what our Earth used to look like back 200 million years ago versus the present. And this has all happened via solar forcing, and in varying periods of time. I have to believe that the ancients were capturing these energies, especially down in the Atlantis area, where I believe down here off the Florida coast, true Atlantis to be, right in between Bimini and Cuba, in fact, at this nodal point. I think we were pretty adept at using these energies to our benefit. And now we've got that period of time. The Sun's giving us ample energies to do it. It's giving us ample energies to overthrow these guys. And as these energies come out, and as the Earth's expanding, it'd be wise for us just to keep in mind that we're going to feel a little bit weird when the KP index that we can measure, the harshness of these events coming from the Sun, whether they're coronal mass ejections or solar flares or other electromagnetic anomalies, we can keep track of our health. And here at the end of the video, I'm going to show you actually how you can do that and defend against that with some of the geometry patterns that we've already learned about in previous videos. Hint, Buckyball. But wrapping up Ben Davidson's work here, because I'm only doing a brief summary of it, he actually, by the end of the video, he ends up talking about this model. And this is the Earth and ice, right? The runaway salinity effect. So if you do watch his work, I want to put in a disclaimer that because he doesn't factor in Samuel Warren Carey, Kashava Bhatt, or Walter Cruttenden's research into the modeling here, I think he comes up with what, if you're doing correct math on a false model, you're going to obviously draw the conclusion of. So I can't fault Ben for coming here. But we're not going to, in my understanding, decline into a planet Hoth scenario where the solar ice caps melt, or the polar ice caps melt from solar radiation. influx in from heightened levels of UVC, causing so much melt and desalination that the oceans freeze. This is the runaway effect he says is happening. But if you recall, if we have an expanding Earth and there's new matter being created by the very particle forcing he's describing, the plasma core of the Earth forcing it to the surface, creating new water, creating new sulfur, creating new nitrogen, creating all sorts of new nutrients underneath the ocean, we're actually not going to get the desalination effect that he's describing here, because the mixture of all those other chemicals is going to offset and balance it. The Earth is a perfect system, you know. As it grows, so does its balance relative to its other nutrients, which is also why the CO2 argument itself is bunk, because of the fact that if you're looking at it, plants eat food. So if there's a more abundance of CO2 on the Earth, naturally there are going to be more plants that grow and rise to meet the challenge of eating that food, because there's an abundance of resources. So this is truly how things go. It's all kind of behind these concepts of steganography, as we've talked about before, but go to the binaryresearchinstitute.com, you'll learn about this stuff. Go to suspiciousobservers.com, learn about Ben's work, and truly watch his movies he's made on these topics, as they're really, really good. And give yourself a little bit of hope in arming and preparing for the skills you're going to need to grow your own food in these times, and absolutely all of that stuff. But just tracking what it's going to do to your health, and preparing yourself even further by being at a place at which you can survive the what a lot of people I think are thinking is going to be like a nuclear holocaust scenario. I have a little bit more hope than that. This is an interesting chart that I showed last time. This astro click travel, and I mentioned this was because this is going to be kind of a cool way for people to get into astrology or astrology light. If you're not coming to this before, if you're not coming to this but for the first time, it's real simple. You just put in, if I say I was born today, right? So if I was to have a son born today in 2019, let's say 12 noon in the United States, Phoenix, Arizona, right? This gives me, based on what my Vedic astrology chart would be, it gives me a readout of my Earth energy grid pattern at the time of my birth. So this actually extends the concept of, if you're following where I'm at, you go to the bottom of the page and astro click travel after you've entered in your information, and it gives you this perspective on things. So in other words, how you read this chart is, for a person that was born in Phoenix on that date, that time, you have these various energy lines based on where the planets are at in their orbit, and you can kind of click on these things and see, okay, this is Mars, it's more beneficial on the west of this line. So it tells you advice on, okay, your particular personality type, your astrology sign, based on the magnetism of the planetary arrangements of when you were born, you'd best be served to live on this side. This is a really cool tool that can give you some guidance as to where you should move, especially with these energies coming in. People feel weird, and if you're living in a space that does not resonate with your harmonic structure, you might want to consider coming to this site and moving. So again, moving to one of the spots that's on here, if it's well within your means to do so anyway. Anyway, I don't know if that was kind of all. Yeah, I mean, the graphic I should probably associate with it is this, of course, the twin snakes, the 33 vertebrae that we were talking about earlier, climbing up. I certainly don't want to get into a discussion of or be committing the fraud of what Gigi Young has called fast food spirituality. This stuff's really helpful, and I do encourage people, even if it's a weird concept, for them to explore what astrology has to offer. I myself, going back to to that concept and wrapping this video up and this timeline of Daniel. Being such a student of the Old Testament, and let me see if I've got them. In fact, yeah, here on my shelf, reading books like this, Archaeology and the Bible, and this gigantic introduction of the Old Testament book that truly does describe what the mystery of the Old Testament all is. There's a lot more than meets the eye with these memes in the Old Testament, guys. The Gospels of Jesus Christ are largely intact, out of phase a little bit, but we've got to use traditional critical thinking to wade through even all those sacred religious texts, because I don't know about you, but if I'm using language and I'm equating the word Babel to the word Bible, as in the Tower of Babel, the conflation of language, there's even a book called Babel in the Bible that's worth reading in that respect. It's a worthy investigation into, because the Old Testament reads just like the Florida Maquis work suggests Antarctica's littered with aliens, giants, metaphysical technology, genetic manipulation, you name it. And Jesus Christ came back in the Dark Ages to warn us about all this stuff. I think really what the comet he came and represented to knock down the tower and for us to make way in space to rise back through these ages and potentially learn our power, our lion power along the way in the ascendancy process. So just a guess, this kind of wraps up those solar forcing concepts as they relate to consciousness. If there's any desire for anybody to expand on it in the future, I will. I will say, but as a fix for this, and fixing for not letting the radiations cause cancers and such with you, the structure of the Buckyball as well is one that you can get through a product called C60. And actually, C60 Purple Power is the stuff I buy. I'll put this in the description too, in case anybody's interested in. It's not cheap stuff. It's $180 a month for a supply of it, for a tablespoon supply of it to take in the morning every day. But essentially what C60 is it's suspended buckyballs with carbon molecules that intake into the human body. If you see the Pentagon structure up here too, something interesting about flushing your body of bad radiations by using the C60 this product. And it interacts with your mitochondria to complete free radicals in the body, incomplete cells basically that are floating around and missing electrons. And what's great about these C60 molecules suspended in oil is they can attach to those, complete those cells, and prevent those cancers from forming, and you just flush all that radiation out. So there is a magic to all of these structures, both the expansion joints of the Earth, the pattern at which it fractally expands, our human bodies, and the energy fields of it all. It all connects, and so it all makes sense that by using the parasite network, they can tap into the very places that we're living and program us from there, guys. So give yourself some sovereignty, get some C60, go to Astroclick Travel and get your chart, and talk to you guys soon. And that was, sorry about the lightning and thunder. Like, share, subscribe.